Welcome to Growth Island again. How do you become one of the world's very best? Not just good, but like very, very best in the world. I got Michael Gebi in today, who's participated in the Olympics 5 times, even won medals. He's also a healer, so he does resistance stretching with top athletes.
Body work.
So Michael, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, pleasure, buddy. Pleasure.
Why windsurfing? What's so special about that?
I grew up on the beach in Northwest Florida, so I'm a son of a sailor. And living in Florida, we lived in the water. But windsurfing was like an extension of Hobie sailing and surfing mixed. So I started windsurfing in 81, and windsurfing became Olympic sport in 84, I think in 1980. And a few guys in my town were some of the best windsurfers in the world. They were very gifted. So when I started in the fall of 83, I won a really small world championship. And to give you an idea, the windsurfer class in 1983, the world championship was 880 people competing. So it was a monstrous event, big social event.
How was the culture? So like surfing had this kind of image of being the rebellious. Windsurfing is a bit more gear. So in Denmark, windsurfing is seen as higher class.
Yeah.
How was it back then? Was it the rebels, or was it like you said, coming from the yacht club?
I would say it was the Bob Marley listening folks that wanted to go to the beach and drink a rum and coke or whatever, rum and coconut, and hang out and play some nice music and chill. That was the culture. That was the scene. So, and then these guys from Australia and Hawaii that were like the real legends started showing up. By the time I tried to do the Olympic trials in 84 in Los Angeles, then you realize that windsurfing had been put into the culture of yachting. So that's like going to, a middle class.
How did that fit in? Were you always a rebel? So I've only known you.
I think, the windsurfers had to sort of sneak in there and get into, what we call the Corinthian sport. And then windsurfing exploded. By the time 84, 85, 86, I was a pro windsurfer. And as the sport got more professional, you had to get to places prepared for a world championship or Olympics. You would go there 4 years before the same time as Olympics and camp out for a month, figure out where you want to live, where do you park your boat, so that your housing situation is close to the water, so you can get, multiple, maybe 3 times you go sailing just to look at the conditions, because you're trying to assess the environment that you're going to have to be an expert in. Yeah, it's a technical sport, so it's a heady, sort of like playing 3-dimensional chess.
Yeah. So how do you become one of the best? Like, what do you think is the difference between you and all the other guys that were like, windsurfing is the bomb?
The sport fit my body because I was small, and I always wanted to be really good at something, and I'm very addicted to it. So I just did it all the time. I didn't know anything better.
So how was it back then? Like, now we have such a big focus on health and performance and so on, like diet and so on. How was it?
Well, being an athlete, as soon as I started training Olympics, you wake up the first day. Now you start looking at breakfast a little bit different. Like, okay, so if somebody told me to eat something I don't want to eat, I'd probably eat it if I thought it would help me perform. So, yeah, I experimented on myself for been continuously. Life is an experiment for everybody. But I remember eating high carbs, low fat, and I did that for almost 10 years. And then I discovered Ayurvedic medicine, or the system of eating from yoga called Ayurveda. And I read an Ayurvedic cookbook, which told me about the dashas of the body typing. And that was I was sort of into that. So, yeah, I think you take on any technology, lifestyle traits, trends, belief systems that help you perform and recover better, because anybody can train their butt off. But the trick is recovering and reducing stress and not having things like allergens. I was always trying to keep my weight up. I was really light. And I'd go to the Olympics and lose 10 pounds in a week. Of muscle. I was 6% body fat, So I went from 150 to 140 by the end of the event. That was stress.
That's crazy.
But I have a body type that's catabolic. So when I get stressed, my body eats muscle. You're somewhere in the middle, and somebody is more kappa dominant, the water and earth element. They would actually gain weight if they got stressed. So that was interesting to learn that people had different body types. And you quickly saw in the environment, living in a house full of guys, and maybe 2 of the guys had medals, and 1 guy was a world champion, and this, everyone was the best guy from their country. We trained together because we knew we kept pushing ourselves further away from the guys that were maybe at the top 10. There was sometimes, 5 French guys that could potentially win a gold medal. Yeah. There were teams that were really powerful. The U.S. team, we had a lot of talent, but I seemed to always win. So it probably, in hindsight, wasn't that great for my sport, because I squashed all the guys for 5 Olympics that were trying to come up behind me. When you live we live with people and you train with them, and the environment of traveling and it's a stressful environment. You're living out of a suitcase You start doing stuff that helps you function.
Yeah.
Like I didn't drink coffee until I was 45 years old. I just never got into it. I did the carbo loading thing, low fat, then I switched it completely to high fat, low carbs. And then I was a raw foodist for 7 years. In the middle of that, I was a vegetarian from 1995 to 2000. So I did 2 Olympics, 96 Olympics in 2000 as a vegetarian, which was very unusual. I think the last time I checked that
was very early before vegetarian became.
Yeah, 1996. I think there were 7 people on the 10,500 athletes I could find that were vegetarians because I sought them out. I was curious. But I remember reading stories about Dave Scott or Carl Lewis. Edwin Moses was a vegetarian. So some of the guys that were the legacy, trendsetters, famous people back then. Carl Lewis had an interview. He says, well, in the off season, I eat meat, but when I'm training or competing, I won't eat meat. It's too heavy. And I wasn't eating meat to not be healthy. I was just didn't want to be involved with the killing of animals. I just had to sort of had that as an idea. And I had done enough research. I had friends that were nutritional specialists. I had doctor friends that mentored me. So they're like, yeah, and I discovered I had a body type that does quite well on vegetarian diet. And then I was high raw. It was 7 years. I ate completely raw food, nothing cooked, raw nuts, seeds.
How did you manage to do that traveling around the world all the time? That must have taken a bunch of time.
Well, I was single at the time, so, I could spend 2-3 hours a day cooking and mostly chopping or preparing or foraging or, visiting my favorite farmer friends that had, the best food ever. And I had a collection of, eccentric people that had killer farms and they might have magnets on their water or they were, pulling ormus out of their water. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on. I got, I would call that more like the hippie culture, going, drive your feet up, you bus off into the woods and live an ideological life, But I like all that. I mean, that's one of the reasons I live down here. It's very easy to live a healthy life. We're not wearing underwear per se,
No.
barefoot and, board shorts I'm happiest if I have one piece of clothing on. A little AC at night because it gets a little sticky under the sheets, but
it's a good life though.
It is a good life. And this place, I mean, I live on the water and we can kite every day. I get done working, 4 or 5 o'clock, half hour sunlight, boom. I mean, I rig in my backyard. I launch literally off my condo and Kite Point is my beach. So yeah,
it's
very
a
blessed.
Life. I'm looking at how I can come back next winter. So, so half the winters here is so beautiful. Why did you change from the vegan diet and the raw diet?
Laziness, family, not committing as much time to trying to maintain the carcass. Yeah, just not taking care of myself like I would. And I have 2 kids now. One's 5 and one's 9 months.
So what, do you go like for specific kind of meat or like grass fed that you hear very much like the Dave Asprey or like?
I mean, that's a luxury, but yeah, I mean, I just eat sort of what looks good. I don't eat a lot of meat.
No.
But I've sort of psychologically gotten over I avoided it for 23 years. I mean, I think I went 15 or 17 years without even eating eggs and very little dairy. So, and I did fine on it. There's the part of me psychologically that thinks that, maybe you're missing something or maybe that's why you're prematurely gray but I started seeing gray hair at 24, but I lived a stressful life,
Yeah.
And I went hard, I trained as hard as I could every day. I mean, I'm lazier than the guys that are raw animals, but within my own realm of what I could do, I went hard. I'd wake up,
Yeah.
I'd get up a little bit later than everybody. I needed more sleep, and typically as reading something or researching something at night, I just have a lot of things that I've been interested in related to consciousness or awareness. I would use the word spirituality, but it's too loosely used. But yeah, I mean, I have interest on how reality works and trying to master your mind and trying to get a sport or having a discipline to eat a certain way. I mean, everybody can eat. There's no rules on eating. You can eat anything, literally.
How much sleep did you get? You're saying you needed more sleep than others. I need my 8 hours.
9 hours.
Yeah.
10 would be optimal, which I haven't had in a long time.
No.
Yeah. But then, one of my teachers says one of the secrets of longevity is sleep deprivation. Okay, so, and you go, well, that sounds counterintuitive. And so that was said without a lot of details, but this gentleman that mentioned that his master they lived with for 14 years never slept. So I find it very interesting. There's people that can pull stuff like it off. And at first when you hear it, you go, baloney, bullshit. You don't believe it. It can't be true but if you study the lives of spiritual masters, of people that end up being very high level, developed consciousness, for example, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, They may sleep 2 hours a night. Winston Churchill during the Second World War was, taking 6 20-minute naps a day or something because he was always up. But he was probably really grounded, really peaceful, maybe drank 20 cups of coffee, but he's the type of guy that he's so mellow that it would, you'd have to hit him on the head with a bat, for half an hour to get him upset. That's typically a kappa person, which Ayurvedically is somebody that's slow to get excited, slow to get moving, but they have great endurance and longevity. Like me, I'm quick to excitement. Very dry, light. I talk fast. I change subjects mid-sentence. I'm very easily stimulated by the environment. And then your body type somewhere in the middle. You're a little more grounded, a little more organized, a little more, you can stay on task. So in hindsight, that's probably why I do good with sports like kite surfing and windsurfing that consume all your energy or you crash. Like when you're kiting, if you crash, it's like I was thinking.
Yeah.
So that's probably the main reason I windsurf. I'd sick of myself. So I'd go out windsurfing and, get some peace for a while.
The mind quiets.
Yeah.
So many people feel that when they go surfing.
Yeah.
For me, it's very much the thrill and adrenaline. Like kite surfing, when I'm jumping, I feel like so high.
Yeah.
And like that, like, woo! Something's gonna go wrong. And luckily landing most of the jumps, right?
So, in my 60 countries of traveling, it's one of the best setups I've seen. So we feel very blessed to live here. Yeah.
What about, you mentioned mindset. What did you do back then when you were like competing at the top? And has that changed to like what you do mindset wise?
Well, the first thing you do is I think you observe everyone else because you can only relate, from what's going on in your head. And I think the first thing you naively think that everybody thinks or acts the same or has the same perceptions. And you realize that people are really freaking strange and going in 100 million different directions. So, how many religions are there? Well, how many humans are there? That's how many, religion means realization of what? Self, God, universe, whatever created us, if that's even how it works. We all sort of have to deal with that daily level. Those kind of questions I've always been interested in. So mindset for me is like my perception of reality. And although I might have been consumed with a sport, it really wasn't about being the best. It was just so interesting and entertaining. It's, I watched my 5-year-old kid get into his train set and 2 hours later, he's still, piddling with pieces. And, my dad was always, working on his boat. He would, he loved his boat. It was a wooden boat. It was always trying to sink. So every day we got in it, it's starting to sink, so you had to repair it or, fix something, the sails, the rigging, and the diesel engine, which was, 60 years old. My dad built his first car, from the junkyard. He went and got a bunch of parts and built himself a Model T Ford. So he could build anything. My grandfather was sort of like that. So they were always playing with something. So, windsurfing and just was like an extension of that. And I was pretty technically adept. I liked tweaking and I designed and tested and developed a lot of equipment. So that was very consuming because it's a creative process and you're trying to make something easier to ride or more fun and get that magic board. And I think I built 1,000 custom boards, at an average of $1,000 a board. The equipment development was consuming. And so that kept it interesting.
Yeah.
I think in hindsight, when I was coaching, the breadth of your experience looking backwards, you realize that you maybe have something that people don't have that you take for granted. And that is just a commitment not to give up. Willpower. And anybody that's successful just makes a decision. I will, be a millionaire. I will own my own business. I will be an entrepreneur. I will, I'll be the best at sport. And some people are unreasonable. And that's maybe the best way to be. It doesn't really have to do with anyone else. I never had anybody tell me I couldn't do anything in my life. Sometimes the bottom of the mast was on, and I got myself in some trouble, but I always got out of it. And when you do stuff like that, in hindsight, all the stuff when I was a World Cup windsurfer, the stuff that we planned, most people go out dying because it would be extreme conditions. So, but that's the, that's the price you pay to systematically build your way up and do extreme.
Did you ever have any of your co-colleagues or like competitors that died under a race?
Not during a race. I had one pro kite friend of mine break his back right in front of me, paralyzed himself, broke his neck. And that was in Nudist, Namibia, Africa. And I was working with Robbie Douglas and we were trying to break the world speed record. And I think it was the second year, which we didn't break the first or second year. We didn't break the record, but we had dug a trench by that time on this mud flat that was very windy. And so we were sailing in a channel. So when you crashed, you left the 3 foot wide 1 meter channel at its narrowest, and you would go downwind onto the beach, onto hard packed mud and sand, and going 60 knots, and you would cartwheel an endo. So some guys took some beatings, but this guy fell. A gentleman fell in the channel before him and was down and couldn't get his kite back up. And this guy, the French guy, came down and stopped, but it was so windy he couldn't stand still. So then he slowly got skidded into the other guy's line set, which made his kite make a little move, and it was blowing about 45, 50 knots, and he was on a 10-meter kite, which is massive, but it was a really strange. I can't even remember the name of the kite, but it wasn't a sea kite. It was bridled like a foil kite, but it was inflatable. And that kite actually almost broke the world record a couple times because it was the most depowerable kite in the world, although you don't even necessarily need that much power. So he had high depower, but he got pulled into the guy's line set and it pressed his bar, and he got pulled quickly. His kite loaded, and he got pulled and sucked into the other guy's kite, and he went about 20 feet in the air and then came down inside the other guy's kite and broke his spine. And what's weird is, in hindsight, I had ran and thought I had just got my hands on him, but I actually got about a foot away from grabbing him, and he did that magic carpet ride, get sucked up. He went about 100 feet away, and then boom, and he was in this much water, started screaming bloody murder. I ran over to him, and it took me about 30 seconds to realize. He's like, because he started freaking out in French, and my French is not fluent. He's like, hey, man, I can't move my arms, I can't move my legs. So, and his kite was looping and dragging him and the other guy in an offshore wind with no safety into this deep shark-ridden water of this bay in Luderitz. And another guy came and jumped on his kite and stopped it pre-launching. And then we cut him out of his kite and put him on a board and waited for an ambulance to come and got him out of there. But a lot of coaches have died, and then other athletes have died that I've known just from, getting sick or accidents, or doing other sports. Yeah, it happens.
It attracts people that do many different extreme sports.
Yeah.
So there's many ways to go out early. How about when you've been coaching people? Like anything you've seen that kind of is consistent with some of the best people or the best athletes?
I think your job as a coach is trying to talk somebody into talking themselves out of that they are a genius. When we're in school, we're taught there's, one or two types of genius, like Albert Einstein. Oh, he's really good with numbers, or he's very good at writing a thesis, or he's very good logically. Like lawyers can take a lot of complicated information and piece it together. But then there's, for example, a mechanical genius. Then there's people geniuses. Like, Bill Clinton is a genius of people. I mean, that guy talks to anybody. And then there's, guys that sort of bridge a bunch of different worlds, like Tony Robbins, like a motivational speaker. But in reality, he's not telling you anything you haven't heard. But he's got such inspiration, then he's got all these connections and stories. And so he goes, well, if this guy did this, and if you used, you pay attention to this, and you change your behavior patterns, or you catch yourself in your dysfunction. Yeah, I mean, if you're paying attention, you're going to evolve. And I think the toughest thing is not to be too hard on yourself, and then just be brutally honest. Maybe don't tell anyone else where you're at, but everybody, when I coach athletes, like, all right, so you want to be an Olympic gold medalist? So everybody wants to do that. I can go and talk to 2,000 kids in an auditorium at a school and say, here's my medals, and how many people want a medal? And every kid, 10-year-old kids, oh yeah, okay. So how many kids want to train 8 hours a day for 8 years? And now you look around and half have sat down because maybe they're not into something that they want to do that much intensity. But if you love to do something and it hasn't been forced upon you, you're going to do that. Kids get into stuff. Warren Buffett, 10 years old, had read all the books on making money within, 3 states or something from all the libraries, because that's what he was into. He's like, I'm going to be rich, and whatever your motives are. Artists, we live in a world where people try to be tangible and realistic. So say you're an artist. I remember kids that were really gifted artists when I was a kid, and their parents were like, you need to get into industrial art or work for a business and do stuff on a computer. And they're like, no, I'm going to be a sculptor today and do some wild painting and do some driftwood and welding tomorrow. And the guys that really stick with it, they're just having a blast. Those people are, to me, are the outliers, because that's not very common. We're typically governed and buffered and pushed into a very safe, ensuring survival, from our parents. I mean, we're only a couple of generations from our parents. If you didn't come from old money, which was 10, 15 generations of mansions and private jets and huge businesses, then we're 2-3 generations away from basically your parents a lot of times living at survival levels. Like, if it was wintertime 100 years ago and you didn't have enough food, you had to rough through the winter, go down in the the root cellar if you lived in somewhere cold, like in Denmark or Canada, where it freezes half the year. It's permafrost. Yeah, the world's really changed, but there's access to so many cool people. There's great places to get inspiration, and then there's no rules. I mean, you can make your own life so easily doing anything now, which is fun. Like you have a mix of whatever you're doing with your business and then podcast. Thank you for letting me do your podcast, because I've threatened to do one for years, and like 4 or 5 people this week, like, all right, when are you going to get your podcast going? And then I can interview guys like you that are interesting,
It is.
Motivate some people, maybe.
It is. Moving to resistance stretching. I tried it myself now.
What do you think? What do you think of it?
I feel very loose afterwards. Yeah. I really liked opening my chest. There was one thing is the pain goes away, but for me the opening of my chest and that lightness afterwards.
You just said something interesting. Light goes in 2 directions. So there's weightless light, and then there's lightweight, and then there's light like no more darkness. So pain and suffering is black hole in your body. Athletes know pain quite well because they train to the level that they can handle, and then wake up the next day and you're not urinating blood or anything. But I remember 3 years after I retired, I woke up and had a strange sensation, and it was the realization that the first time in 20 years my body didn't hurt. Like when I lifted my head off, because I'd get up in the morning and first thing that happened, it's like you got in a fight, like every day was somebody beat you up, and it was yourself beating you up. Because to go fast as an athlete in a sport that's a power and technical sport, the more you output, the faster you go. I didn't have the leverage of the faster guys, so I had to sail with more bravado, more intensity. And it's like a wrestling match. Windsurfing is like wrestling. So you're statically loaded, and then the equipment's, getting pulled and wrenching. Your feet are in foot straps. You have a harness, so you can hook into the harness line. So there's a huge amount of force that you're tapping into, and you're taking all that force and driving it through a universal, where the sail attaches to the board, this little joint, rubber joint, and then, driving off the fin. So it's a torque sport. And because of that, I injured my back in 1995 on a 3.5 hour long distance race that I had to pump the whole time with a huge sail. There was very light wind, and it had some prize money in it. So I really went. The guy that should have easily beat me, I didn't let him beat me. He was one of my roommates, and so I beat him, but I paid a price that at the end of the race I couldn't feel my arms. I mean, literally my arms were numb. So I knew my neck was out, and I had 2 buddies that were chiropractors. One of them was actually at the event. So when I got into the beach, I was like, I'll just get Paul to adjust me, because I knew I'd sort of put so much output that I messed myself up. And it was the first time I realized, that was probably stupid. Like you didn't need, but I don't know, the prize money. It was like $5,000 prize money or something. I was like, yeah, well, I could use an extra $5,000 before I go to Europe for 2 months of training or whatever. And I got back to the beach, and my chiropractor wasn't there. I think the longest I went without my back going out was about 2 weeks. So 2003, I had been retired for 3 years from Olympic competition, but I was coaching a couple guys on the U.S. team and then a couple other guys in Europe, all private athletes that were paying me to work with them. And one of my athletes was in St. Pete, and he ran into a guy named Bob Cooley, is the guy that developed and generated this system called the Genius of Flexibility. It's a geniusofflexibility.com. And Bob got on the phone because he had talked to this kid. He was maybe the best in the nation at the time. And Bob goes, give me the phone and put this guy Gebi, put your coach on the phone because I want to talk to him. And he called me up, and he goes, Gebi, you don't know who I am? My name's Bob. He says, I know you get this. And he said that he says, I know you get this already. He says, you're going to come over, I'm going to stretch you, I'm going to change your life. And he goes, I figured out something that nobody knows. And I know, and my athlete had mentioned that, my back was a problem. He says, come on over. He says, I'll give you a demo and we'll blow your mind. And so I called a doctor friend of mine that lived in Miami, and he just bought a new AMG Mercedes, which is like a 600 horsepower race car. And I said, let's drive to Tampa and go visit some friends and see this guy. And he said, okay, it's a week plan. So I showed up, and there were 2 NFL football players that were getting worked on by Bob. Bob's got a trail of pro athletes that follow him around. He's the guy that if you send anybody to him, he can fix anything. He's one of those guys. He's a true master. He was a professor of mathematics, so he's very intelligent. But him and his girlfriend were walking across the street. They got hit by a car, and she was almost immediately killed. And 4 hours later, he walked out of the ER room, the emergency room, with a broken collarbone and whatever else had happened. But the next few months, he tried to get his movement back, and he realized from the trauma of the impact, he had a huge amount of fascia and scar tissue. And he was a very gifted mover, and had high body awareness. He was like a choreographer, dancer style person. I think he was even involved with the movement. They were studying movement, like some sort of not-for-profit that he was partially involved with. So he knew he had all this dense scar tissue and fascia from the trauma of the accident and watching his girlfriend get killed. So he sat down one day and he said, I'm going to stretch myself. And he said, I'll do it for 6 hours. And so he sat, maybe with his legs out in front of him, and he tried to get his head to touch the ground, which he could typically do, and he couldn't do it. And he sat there for a few hours, according to him, then in a very short period of time, like a 30-second period, he went into an altered state, and he realized that he resisted the direction he wanted to stretch, which is what the body innately did, because he'd sort of stumbled into a meditative state, and then his head went to the ground pretty quick. And the more he fought the direction that he was trying to stretch, the more he stretched. So then what he did is he realized something that if you think about it, stretching is contracting like a yawn and fighting it. But if you have an injury in the body, it's like you're stuck in the contracted part of like you can't yawn. So if somebody pulls that tension out of you when you resist, it literally pulls the trauma, the cognitive shock that gets stuck energetically in the fascia tissue. So when we get older, what makes people inflexible is fascia density. And we used to believe that fascia was like a tube that's, just covered like your bicep. Like you got two, you got two little tubes of bicep in there. So the fascial tube of the bicep, attaches to ligaments and tendons attach to the bone. And then when you go to lengthen your arm, lengthening is fascia relaxing, but contracting, the fascia has to turn off, and the voltage causes the cells to activate and make a contractive impulse. So, and you got 4 different types of muscle cells in the body. So if you have a lot of fascia from windsurfing and kiting like I do, then you'll find, for example, that the opposite direction of getting pulled, which is more fascia dominant, when you try to contract, you'll say, wow, I'm weak relative to if you try to pull me, I'm like a berserk strong. Now, if I try to pull back and shorten, I'm relatively weak. But for example, if you put, 800 pounds on a bench press and I have to hold it 1 inch away from straight, because I'm very good at doing that. That's where it'd be really strong. But as soon as it moves 2 inches, even 100 pounds down here, I probably couldn't get it off my chest. So where people overload their bodies, they have huge amounts of fascia, mostly in the back of the body or the side of the body, the IT band, side of the legs. And the front of the body is not that much fascia. But what I just told you about your contractive capacity is relative. For example, for your bicep to contract, the tricep has to relax. And when something starts getting exhausted and you get weak as an Olympic athlete or a coach, you can say, okay, coach, this guy's getting an injury. You can only have 25 pounds with the right arm and 5 pounds with the left. So the left's messed up. What do we do to get back online to have full power like the right? Because he injured it. He's like, oh, maybe in 6 months. And what's weird is it might be 6 stretches with high force. And what happens is the voltage tells the fascia to release. So when you stretch with resistance, the cellular matrix causes the voltage the animated energy that you're putting through the nervous system that cause that muscle to contract, tells the fascia to release. And the more force you use or the more reps, the quicker you remove that fascia. And then you go back and check the strength, and the strength comes back on. So it's not even stretching. It's like you're finding out that there's this bloody on-off switch built into all humans. And that when you stretch somebody, they become strong instantly. So whatever's tight is weak, and whatever's painful is low voltage or weak. So what you do is the self-aware resistance of getting your biceps stretched longer. When you go back and can check the contractive power, every single time I lengthen it with resistance, the contractive power goes up. Oh my God. So if you have an injured back, and then you've been taught that the back is overly developed and heavy with fascia, the stomach is short and tight. If you stretch the front of the body, the back stops hurting. So when Bob worked on me, he worked on me for 3 hours. He stretched the front of my body, and he literally fixed my back in 3 hours of work.
It's crazy.
But it was also 8 people stretching me at one time. So imagine skinny me, 145 pounds, being pulled into, child pose, like in a ball, and you had 2 people on each extremity, and I stayed as contracted as hard as I could, and they peeled me open and did it over, like a bunch of cushions. So it bent and lengthened the front of my body literally by 2 inches because it just caused the fascia release. And I stood up and I was like high. I immediately knew. I was like, oh my God. And that was it. My back, I stood up and my back wasn't trying to contract to hold me up because the front was long enough to hold it up and the back turned off. So That was in 2003. My back has not gone out since, and I don't do anything to maintain my back. So I'm not an exerciser. Like, I don't go to the gym. I mean, I do get stretched a couple times a week by my assistants. I'll do a little, 5-minute sessions here and there, but I'm pretty damn lazy. I mean, for me, exercise is going kiting or surfing. And
that's why I see you light up as well. When I see you cruising down the water like that big smile.
Yeah. So it's fun to ride. We did a nice downwinder yesterday. That was awesome, huh?
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
It is. You also started from La Boca, or you started?
Oh no, we did. We just started up at Danny. Actually, right up on the other side. The guy that has the house right there.
Yeah.
But he just bought a house on the beach down in Quentro, so
it's a magical spot.
He's got his own little mini bay there. Yeah. He's on the water.
What do you think is like resistance stretching? Or you call it something else as well?
Yeah, assisted resistance stretching.
Why?
Resistance, flexibility, strength training, RFST. These are, Bob's written a couple books. I think the third book's about out. The gentleman is named Bob Cooley. I would definitely consider him my master. He's incredibly, he's berserk genius. If you can imagine, what's really crazy about the stretching is it shows you that your psychology of your body is found in your physical body. So the shape of your body is the story of your life. That's a pretty heavy statement, but it makes sense if you think about it. Everybody is wearing whatever they experience, and if you stretch 40,000 people or whatever the hell, Bob's been doing that for 40 years. So or at least getting his hands on somebody for 1 or 2 minutes during a demo where you download the psyche and the persona, and you can see a correlation between a developed part of the personality and the physicality and what they can and can't do with their body. And when Bob first talked to me about that, it just went right over my head, and I had no interest in it. But in 2007, 7 years after I retired, I called Bob up and I said, I want to go back to the Olympics. And he says, I know you do. And he says, you don't think you can rehab your body. He says, I'll work with you for a month and a half, 2 times a day, 4 hours a day. In a month and a half, you decide you want to go back to the Olympics. And what had happened is I had a dream, and I woke up in the middle of the night and said, I got to go back to the Olympics to be the poster child for yoga, for raw food, for, detox, whatever, all the cool stuff that I had sort of developed and was implementing in the athletes I was coaching. And at that time, I was coaching the Olympic gold medalist from the 2004 Olympics, Golf Friedman from Israel. So I had a pretty good gig. I was making good money, and I was doing about as good as I could do with my coaching business as an Olympic windsurf coach. And I knew if I made an Olympic campaign, that was was going to end those contracts, and it was going to cost me a bunch of money. So I talked to my wife about doing that at the time, and she agreed to it. And 2 trainers moved in a couple days later and started physically stretching me. And a month and a half later, I lived with Bob for 3 weeks to a month in a compound where I was training some other athletes, and he was working on them and working on me as well. And after about a month and a half, my body had regenerated so much, my mind was blown. Because you can fix anything through stretching. That's a shocking revelation. I mean, you can totally transform tissue. Like, I've removed scar tissue and literally scars through massage. Gras Shah was just scraping. I think we might have done a little bit of that. Different tools. So, my people ask me what I do. I'm like, well, I'm a body worker, and I try to turn people back to liquid, get it back to the cosmic plasma stage. Like pre and post orgasm. Anybody has an orgasm, the whole body just goes, So when you stretch yourself, the heaviness of, the angst that you're carrying, that static comes out of the system. The tissue is transfigured on the spot. You get your voltage back, and if you're dealing with a part of your body that's been dysfunctional, man, your confidence and your belief in the future, it's miracle work to stretch people. Because I'll have people come in and they're like, my shoulder's been frozen for 10 years. I've seen 50 doctors in 20 countries, and I'm like, 5 minutes later, like, it's moving. Because their consciousness is visiting, and they're getting an analytical assessment of what they can and can't do with their body.
How to get it out to more people? Why it hasn't gotten out to more?
That's an interesting little question. Bob's a perfectionist.
Yeah.
When you go onto his website, he doesn't have a lot of facilitators that he gives credence to be worthy of his website, which is sad because so many people go, there's only 8 people on the website. And I know he's trained 4,000 to 6,000 people. I think there's 6 people that he trusts. They're probably the ones that are the hardcore guys that he's been training nonstop. So that may be part of the reason. But I think it needs, because he's not an athlete per se, it doesn't give the credibility of And then the languaging, like I think, if you ask me to explain resistance stretching in 30 seconds, I could probably do a better job than most because I have a very interesting full spectrum mix of healing and then also dealing with professional athletes. So when somebody goes bullshit, I go, well, guess what? The Olympic gold medalist I coach, Olympic silver medalist coach, guy, all these, go down the list, all these guys, this is something I do to them every day and it helps. And there's a reason that they've had a little bit of an advantage because I'm constantly trying to find something that not everybody knows about and download that into my athletes or my clients. So, and then because of my results, people have more certainty. One of the masters a couple thousand years ago said, it is done unto you as you believe. So if somebody says, oh, go see Gebi and he makes everybody feel better, then psychologically they're already waiting. That's 30% placebo effect is already working because and then when I explain what they do, it's not like anything else. And it sort of, it's a mix of Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic and acupuncture and yoga and so it's a hard thing to explain, and then it's very hands-on, labor-intensive work that I don't think most people want to work as hard as I do to work on people. But you don't have to stretch people with huge amounts of force. So I would say that I've moved my practice a little more spiritual, so less intensity, and I use it as an excuse to get the person to have like an inner dialogue with their unconscious, because when you stretch people, you immediately find pain and you find a lack of range of motion somewhere. And where you don't want to move is where you're stuck. And that's exactly where you need to go. You need to develop yourself in places where you're stuck. And that's the great analogy. So the conversations we have, you don't explain that in 5 minutes. And some people get upset because I might talk to them for 30 minutes, but I know that something I said has been such a traumatic, like awakening, insightful comment, maybe it flipped their perspective on something, and all of a sudden they look at something that they've always looked at from a place where they were stuck, and they go, oh wow, I never thought about it like that. And then of course the arms and the body starts moving. So it's fun to fix people like that.
Must be amazing when you see. I think it's the same with coaching, when you ask someone a question and suddenly makes them reflect and see things in a new light, and then they can continue from there.
So flexibility, becoming flexible in all ways is the one of the things that Bob says, and I'd agree. You make somebody flexible physically, then emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, or thinking type, they become more flexible. I'm always amazed how when I get stuck trying to deal with a problem, how I try to deal with it from the same place all the time. And what I love is when you interact with other people, you're like, wow, I would have never. Yeah, I've been trying to climb over the wall, and he's like, why don't you just open the door, walk around the side of the wall? Yeah. Like, why didn't I? We hit something, and we're programmed. The reason we're stuck is we're not running off intellect or downloading or letting access to your higher intelligence come through, which comes more from meditation or people. I know guys that were very successful bond traders that they would get downloads when they're dreaming, and then they would trust it. So we get premonitions. We have all these different ways that we can collect information or perceive reality and get shifts. Be it medicine. Some people love tripping on mushrooms or doing acid or just doing some breath work or not eating for a week. Going to a black cave. Not talking. Vipassana meditation. Don't talk for a week. There's all sorts of things you can do to shift your reality mindset so you get completely different perspectives. And then when you go and work on something that you're stuck on, you get a different insight. But the value of coaching is that someone can bring their wisdom or say, hey, talk to this guy. And so that's the fun thing about these podcasts is where there's a real decentralization of the genius that runs through, what I would call the human condition. We have all the answers and solutions, We don't have to reduce the population. There's more than enough abundance, but we have to live, differently and more in harmony, or maybe go back, like we used to live, 50, 100 years ago, which is something I really like about down here. Life's way simpler. And then maybe you don't need as many solutions, because when life gets complicated, the solutions are more, you get more forced on, you get forced into corners. So.
But the simple life, I think that's one of the key things as well, that we overcomplicate life.
Yeah.
And if we can make it more simple. Time is running, Michael. I know you have to run as well.
Yeah, man.
I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, maybe there's something interesting to have been had in the storytelling.
Sure.
Thanks for having me, buddy.